This is a video for a basic absolute beginner. The reason why we did a video for beginners is because a lot of you guys are left out. Most videos and instructional things in magazines refer to people that have already been playing. So we're going to show you some very, very basic things, which may seem very simple to some of you, but to other people these are basic foundation building blocks that are very, very important. That you'll find as the years go by, you're glad you learned them now. Well, basically how to pluck, how to finger with your left hand, how to hold the bass, and some very, very basic fundamental essentials that you'll find valuable eventually, trust me. So enjoy and good luck. Okay, so if you decided to play bass, you're probably going to need to have a bass. And there's a lot of great basses out there to choose from. I'll give you a couple points about what you might look for in the bass you want to play eventually. This bass right here is a Yamaha BEX. It's a bass I designed with Yamaha. But there's a lot of great basses on the markets, and you should go for what feels good for you. There's a couple of things you might want to look for. There's basic components of every bass. It has a bridge. That's the thing that holds the strings to the body, and also is adjustable for intonation, which we'll explain later. Pickups, which are the electronic part of the bass. The body, the neck, the knobs and all. Headstock with the tuners. All these things, it seems awfully basic, some of the things I'm going to say in this basic video, but sometimes we forget about the most fundamental parts, and that's where we can go and get into trouble later. So if I say something that you already know about, bear with me. Anyway, this is just a basic bass, neck, body. This one happens to have a hollow body, so it has a little bit more, makes it a little bit different tone. Every bass is made of a different piece of wood, so each one's going to sound different. Some may sound similar to others, like a maple body or an ash body or whatever type of wood you might have. They may sound different according to the wood, according to the shape, according to what's done with it, also according to how the neck is attached to the body. This is a bolt-on neck, where the neck is bolted on from behind. Some people say that they have a different sound than a neck that is glued on, or from a neck that is one giant piece that goes the entire length and the body is two pieces that are attached to it later. This is all covered in books and information about how basses are made, different manufacturers. You can go on the internet and find, just look up, Fender, Gibson, Yamaha, Warwick, a million different great bass companies. Go to their websites and find out what they're made of and how they're built. And that'll help you to determine what you think might start to appeal to you. Now, some things you might not know about, which may be a factor in your choice, which are kind of important. How the bass sits on you and how it feels is very important, because you're going to spend a lot of time, hopefully, if you really pursue playing bass with enthusiasm, you're going to spend a lot of time with this thing sitting on your lap. So it should feel relatively comfortable. You notice how most instruments have that curve in here. Not all of them, but most of them do. And it's kind of handy because it kind of sits right in your leg there, and your arm goes over here, and your hand is able to pluck here, and of course your left hand goes here. Again, that sounds very basic, but bear with me. Some people have never really thought this through, having played for as long as I have. Trust me on some of this stuff. Anyway, so you want the bass to feel comfortable on you. One very important point, I don't have a strap on this bass, but as you stand up, you'll have the bass strapped on. The length of your strap is very important, because sometimes it will determine where the bass sits on your body when you stand up. If it's too low, it's going to change. It looks better, but it's going to change all the angles of your hand as far as how you play. So be prepared to know that the position of the bass on your body, whether you're sitting or standing, has everything to do with how your arms go around it and how your hands hold it. So all those things are very, very important. Later on, you'll find out that if the bass is too low and you want to do something fancy schmancy with your left hand, you can't get around because it's too low. It looks cool like that, but it's just sometimes too difficult to play. Or maybe you can just pull it up for the time being to do that fancy lick and then drop it back down to where it feels more comfortable for you. But there are no rules as far as how a bass should be held, or how it should be played, or what music you should do, or what scales you should play in any way, shape, or form. That's good in that you're not restricted. And you can play anything your little heart desires, but it's bad sometimes in that because there are no real rules, what are the guidelines? So we'll try and give some guidelines without enforcing any rules, if you will, on how the bass is played and how it's approached during this video. Another issue with choosing a bass is how many strings should it have. I'd suggest a minimum of 4, but who knows. But there are also very popular now 5 and 6 string basses. Generally, a 5-string bass adds a lower string, so you get a lot lower note. A lot of popular music now has a lower note in it, so lower than the low E there. So a 6-string bass also adds a lower note and a higher one as well. So it's your choice. There's kind of a myth that a 5 or 6-string bass is more difficult to play, or you're a better player if you play a 5 or 6-string bass. I don't necessarily think that that's true. I happen to be a creature of habit, so I've played 4-string my whole life. I have a 6-string, I've used it on a bunch of records, and it's not that much more difficult once you get used to it. So you should make that choice up front. One of the reasons why choosing a bass should be important to you is, like I said before, you're going to be sitting with it on you for a long time. It's going to be a part of you, so you're going to want to have it be comfortable for you. But I would suggest to you to try to stick with the same instrument for a long time. Initially, when I first began playing, I started with a Fender P bass, and basically later on it became a Yamaha Attitude bass. Back in 1984 when we first started with Yamaha, and then they came out at the end of the 80s with that bass. But it's still pretty much the same configuration of what I had from the beginning. So I played the same basic setup for almost 20 years, which is a big help to me because I became very used to the bass after a while and exactly where everything was. If you go changing around a lot, maybe in the beginning until you find something comfortable, change a few instruments, but once you find a bass that you think is going to work, as soon as you run into a problem, don't go to another bass. Solve the problem. That's a very important point because I think a lot of times people give up on a bass too quick and go to something else, and they lose a lot of time of experience that they can have on one instrument because that's very, very important. Most old school players, like the old days, Jaco Pastorius, a famous jazz bass player, he played the same beat-up old bass for years and years and carried it around, with him, and it became a part of him. My original old P bass was a part of me. My first Yamaha Attitudes were. This is a new bass for me. I plan on spending a lot of time with it so that I get very used to it. I play it a lot at home, so I'm used to it. So I suggest that's one of the reasons why I'm trying to emphasize the importance of picking the right instrument right up front. Whether it's 4, 5, or 6 strings is your choice to whatever you feel comfortable with. 4-string is fine. Most everything I show you musically applies to all basses, whether they're 4, 5, or 6-string. So make your choice. And on the 4-string, there also is an option with a thing called a D tuner, which I don't have on this bass yet. It's coming soon, which you can actually drop this low note down a little bit lower if you need a lower note. But some of that has more to do with music and theory and playing. And right now, I would just like to try and concentrate on your choice of a bass. So again, you can go with a million different configurations. So I suggest go down, find a guitar store or maybe a friend of yours that has a couple basses, and sit down with a bass for a while until you can get used to it and until it feels right to you. It feels comfortable on you here. When you put your arm around to play it, does it hurt or rub you the wrong way anywhere? It just doesn't feel right. Even sometimes how the bass looks, as fun as this might seem, may have an effect on you. Later on, if you think the bass looks stupid, you may be less inclined to get up on stage and play with it. So it's kind of a crazy idea, but nevertheless, I've seen it affect some people where they get a bass that looks great, but they can't play it, but it enthuses them and encourages them enough to work at it harder, and eventually they do end up playing it well. So all those factors can come into choosing a bass. The electronics are another point that are important. There are 2 types these days, a passive and active. A passive means there's no battery. It means you just plug in and it's ready to go. Active means there's a battery. This bass happens to be active, and I usually don't use active instruments at all. You see there's a battery little case in here. Find a lot of instruments with that. But this bass has the option of going active or passive. So because I'm so used to using the passive setup, I made the option built into this bass that I could switch between one or the other, just in case I didn't trust the passive. Because one aspect, and this is only my own point of view, on an active bass that has electronics built into it that requires a battery, while you're on stage, at some time, if something is uncertain or you're not sure of it, even if it has nothing to do with the bass, did I lock my keys in the dressing room, or are the monitors feeding back, or somewhere in the back of your mind you're going to get this thought, and in your mind is going to go, is it the battery? So there's always one other thing to be uncertain about. Another point I'm going to make along the lines that ties in with that a little bit is the less variables you have, the less things that can change or alter, the more likely you are to stay on an even keel in a gradation up to a higher level of player. The more that things change around you, the more you're uncertain of what it is you need to troubleshoot, what it is you need to change. So the battery issue is just my personal point of view on whether or not a bass should be active or passive. But it's your choice, and it's how you feel about it. An active bass usually has much more electronic variables. There's better tone controls. It's louder. There's a lot of advantages to it. A passive bass, generally they sound warm and they're nice, and again, that's a very subjective opinion. So you try an active, try a passive bass, fool around with them, see which one is best for you. I really want to emphasize on making a lot of these things your choice. I'll lay the choices out to you, explain them as best I can, so you can make the choices that are best for you. So you may be wondering why I keep talking about how important the position of the bass is as it sits on you. But it has everything to do with how your hands get to the bass so you can actually play the notes. So that's why it's important. So if the bass feels comfortable sitting on your lap, it's sitting there, you feel comfortable grabbing it here, getting your arm over it and putting it there, then we get to the point where we're actually going to play a note, which is very important. Now before I get into that, I just want to point out that there are many, many ways of plucking the bass. When basses first started years and years ago, they had the old P bass, the original Fender Precision bass, had a little block on it for you to hold with your hands so you could play with your thumb. Those guys didn't know you could do anything other than that. I remember I had one of my first original bass. So that's a valid way to play it, with your thumb, if you want to do it like that. With one finger, 2, 3, 4, all 5 if you want. Thumb slapping, or with a pick, or any other way you can conceive of. Now I'll get into the specific mechanics of all those things and how they work. But again, the position of the bass on your body will help your hand feel comfortable when it's down there. One very, very important point, which I may bring up several times during this video, is, for me, this has helped me a lot. It may help you. Always make sure there's a great spot to anchor your thumb. Make sure that it's solidly on something, because you're pulling against the strength of your thumb. The opposable thumb is what you have on your hand there to push against, and that gives your fingers the strength to pull hard. Sometimes if your thumb wasn't anchored, you couldn't pull as hard. So that's a very, very important point. I'll be making that several different times in reference to other techniques and other types of playing. But basically, you're going to play with your thumb or some combination of fingers or all of them. So we'll get into the specifics on all those, as I said, later. But the left hand now, it's some people ask me, do I play when my left hand is over the neck or under the neck? I'm not sure sometimes. I don't really think it through. I just kind of put my fingers on the notes that I have to play and play them. We'll get into, that sounds very oversimplified, but we'll get into specifically how your left hand works mechanically also, and then compare the two of them together and get both of them working, hopefully, towards the same goal. So let's actually take some of the things we've already talked about now and start to apply them and actually play a note. So we got the bass, it's comfortable, it's in our lap, our arm is around here. We're going to take one finger, anchor my thumb, take one finger, and simple as that. That's the beginning of the whole adventure, is that first note. A musical career starts with one note, I guess, like a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. There's your first step. So anyway, that's basically what you're going to do when you want to get a note, is you're going to pluck, pulling like that. Now, again, this may seem overly simplistic to you, but let's take it a little bit further here now for some of you that actually are a little bit more well versed as players. And it seems very simple, like almost anyone could do it. But if you did it for a little while, you'd find it had a little inconsistencies and it wasn't as smooth. You could do 8 in a row, but 9 was a little bit off time. So what you want to do is be able to consistently play notes in a sequence, in a string, because most music is rhythmic. You're going to want to stay in time. You might want to get a metronome happening, or play with a drum machine, or even if you play along with a record, which I suggest and encourage people to do, to play along with records. I did it a lot and still do it, to just be able to play in time. As simple as that. I know it sounds almost too simple, but then the next move is to get to the other string, then the next one, then the next one. Now you notice I'm not playing with my left hand at all because we're just dealing with one thing at a time. Rather than get confusing and dealing with what notes we're playing and what scales and chords and music theory, let's start with the mechanics right here of being able to just pluck a note. So an exercise you can do is get in a comfortable spot, pluck one note on the E string multiple times. Like let's take 8 on each. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now before we can go to the next string, let's go back. In other words, a lot of times when you start to do exercises, you kind of go too quick. So let's just do 2 strings. I know it sounds really simple, but if you can get it really right, your chances of becoming successful as a bass player are much higher. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2. Ridiculously simple, I know, but stay with me. It's a foundation block of the rest of everything else. Now, let's try going across a couple of strings. Simple again, but I'll try just 4 then. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, this isn't music, this is just exercise, just to get the mechanics of your fingers working. Later on, music is a different thing. We'll deal with that. But just getting to mechanics, being able to pluck those notes, have them sound consistent, keeping them in time, again with a metronome in your head. Now, some of you guys might have a hard time with time. Time is a different thing. I will cover that in one separate section. But I just want to be able to have you be able to play the bass, play a note with one finger. That's the basic of it. My thumb is locked, my finger is there, and it pulls. Now, if you go to 2 fingers, it's a little more complicated, but it's still the same principle. But now we're sharing the rhythmic work between 2 fingers. So we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Your goal there is to get those 2 even. So it's not going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You don't accent the wrong note. You just want to basically be able to play both of them, the same volume, same attack, so they almost sound like the same finger playing. But they're not, they're 2. Switch to another string, 8 on each. Do that back and forth, back and forth. I still to this day, after having played 35 plus years, will sit down and practice just that. With a metronome, when I'm warming up before a show or before I start a recording project, with one finger, with 2 fingers, then with 3, then with 4, and every combination I do, I'll warm them up slowly and easily with just that. So that's the basics of playing 1 and 2 fingers. Now 3 fingers, same principle, but we get into a different thing now because we got 3, which is an odd number. Now I'll explain why that's a different thing a bit later, but I just want to basically emphasize work on that with a metronome. Now here, I hope this works, I'm just going to grab a metronome, just like that. It's just a cheap little thing, held together with a rubber band because I dropped it once in the dressing room and it broke. And it's just a little click, but it's time. For hours I do that to this day. It's just a very important thing to know. So get a little metronome, a little click thing, and do that with just those beginning fingers. And if you have trouble in any one thing, stop and go back to the point you were at where you weren't having trouble. If 2 fingers isn't working for you, go back to 1. Okay, so now we covered a little bit about 1 and 2 finger. I'll give you a little bit about 3 finger technique here. The most questions I get regarding my playing are about 3 finger technique. So it's a little complicated. I'll break it down to some basics for you. Basically, you have 3 fingers plucking. Now, most of the music we do is in cut up in either 2s or 4s. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4. So when you have 3 fingers, it's an odd number, and you're playing into an even number. So we have this little jump thing that happens with these fingers. Now, when I play, there's also a question of which direction do I go in? Which finger do I start with if I'm going to use 3 fingers? I start with this one. 1, 2, 3. Now if I'm going to do 4 notes, I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. And then now I have to start the next 4 notes. So 1 starts there. So in other words, 1 starts on another finger each time. 3 and 4 don't match up, so it leaves 1 hanging each time, which jumps over to the next group. Here's how that works. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. On the string, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So what I'm doing is I'm always doing the fingers in this sequence. They don't go back and forth like that. They don't go this way ever. No finger plays 2 notes. Every time it finishes its note, it hands it off to the next finger. So 4 notes with 3 fingers. Now that's kind of fast, so I'm going to slow that down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Very simple. Take it slow. Take it way slow. If it's not making sense to you or it's becoming difficult, don't be afraid to take it as slow as possible, because when I first began to analyze the things I was doing as a player, I had to take it really slow. And sometimes playing slow is more difficult than fast because you really have to concentrate on what you're doing. And here it is. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's how I'm counting it. So my hand is always going in that direction. Ring, middle, index, ring, middle, index, ring, middle, index. So slow, very slow again. Don't be afraid to do it super ultra slow. 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4. Notice how my thumb is locked on there? Now, because my thumb is solidly locked on one spot, my hand's not flying all over the place. It's a little easier for me to stay in one spot. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Simple and basic, but that's when you see me playing, you know, a whole bunch of licks, and when you see another player playing, it's all based on all these fundamentals. It's all based on a couple little things that if you really get them solidly in later on when you want to play some fancy licks or whatever you want to do, whatever your goal is as a player, it's going to become much easier if you lay in a good solid foundation. And one of them is right there. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now with 2 fingers, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. One finger, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. With your thumb or any other manner you could think of to pluck it. With a pick, it could be up, down strokes. I don't have a pick, but I'll just show you what the fingers would do. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. Or it could be all down, 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 or all up. So those are the choices you'd have. Pick, fingers, if it was your thumb. Or just play half of it, and there's a million ways to go about this. But again, just get in solidly. 1 finger, graduate to 2 if you want. 3 if you want, and even 4 if you wanted to get fancy on it. Here's a little bit more about what's actually happening with my right hand, just to give you a little bit more depth of it. And again, I have to explain that I played for many years before I knew any of this, and I had to figure it out when I had to explain it to someone else. This is nature taking its course with me picking bass and being in a band and playing. Later on, I figured out this stuff. So don't worry about figuring it out yourself first. I want to encourage you to go play as much as possible. But here's some basics on what I'm doing there. Most players play from this joint here. So you'll see their fingers moving in that way. 2-finger players would. Stand-up bass players, they put their thumb on the edge of the neck and play in that manner. Since a stand-up bass is in this angle and you can approach it like that, when bass became electric, it went that direction. So the hand turned this way. So now we have a whole different set of mechanics going on with the hand. Now you notice one finger, the fingers are not even. It's not a flat line at the ends of the fingers. This is short, that's a little longer, that's the longest, and that's, I don't know where that is. So basically, what I try to do, instead of working from that joint, I actually end up working from that joint, which makes this flat, which lines up with the string. So that when the fingers are plucking, they're all hitting it at the same spot. where like this, I don't know, if I kept my fingers straight, I couldn't play that. So basically I'm curving my fingers so I can flatten them out, get it up against the string, and I move mostly from that joint there. So that's a little bit more advanced of an explanation for somebody who's beginning bass, but I wanted to put that in just so you see where it went to eventually. Basically, don't even worry about that if you just want to learn some songs to start playing. This is another sideline here, but this just so you understand some of the mechanics of that. Another reason why that works, and I figured this out later, is the radius of the circle of that is smaller than that. So therefore, it fits in between the strings a little easier. In other words, a circle this big, it's harder to fit in between those strings than a circle this big. So it's easier to get in there with that. So that's another little bit of the mechanics of how that works. And again, the thumb is always locked in there. On other basses I've had, I'll sometimes put my thumb up against the string as well and play, and that helps to deaden that string. But basically the principle is still the same on any bass, on any pickup, that your thumb is locked. I'm working from that joint there, 3 at a time, and that's my story. One other point I want to make about right-hand technique is the technique you'll need for slapping and popping. It's quite a bit different than what I was showing you before with the thumb locked and plucking. So I went to actually do a different bass, this greeny bass here, which for me is a little bit easier for me to slap on than the other one. So I'll just give you some basics that I came up with on my own after seeing a couple of other players do this that are much more well-versed in it than I am. Basically, for slapping and popping, you are it originated from a guy, I think it was Larry Graham, famous old bass player. Sorry about the old part, Larry, but a famous bass player, where he basically didn't have a drummer, if I get this correctly, I hope, and he basically kind of mimicked what the drums do on the bass by hitting a bass drum and the snare. So basically that's the move, where you're going to hit down. Basically my thumb is kind of loose. I'm grabbing it down here when I mute it, and when you pluck back up, I use this finger, some guys use this one, or whatever's comfortable for you. Basically you're going to get down, up, down, up, down, up, moving like that. Here it is slow. Hitting down, then in the same motion, it's kind of like my hand gets locked like that, and I hit down, pluck up, hit down, pluck up, hit down, pluck up. Now that's just the right hand for it, and then you can hit different strings. Just hold an octave here. Now that's something a drummer would do with his bass drum and snare. Slow. So basically you're doing drum patterns, or something similar to them, with your right hand. Now sometimes I'll hit 2. But watch your drummer, lock into him, get a song or a piece of music by a slap player that you love, and listen to him and hear how he does that. Basically he's hitting down with the thumb, plucking up again with his finger. So that's the basics of it. As far as what I know about slapping, there's a lot of other guys that know it a lot better than I do. See if it's a simple like slap lick that I'll just make it. In the book you'll see what the actual notes are for that on the left hand, but you'll see how my hand hits, pulls, mutes things, makes notes start, and make notes stop. That's the basic on what your right hand is doing with slap. So use that as a foundation and take it from there. Now that we've covered how you're actually going to pluck a note, what note are you going to pluck? That's very important. Basically, I'm not going to get into a lot of theory here. I basically don't know a lot of theory. I'm just basically a rock player, so I'll give you what I know, and you can take it from there. E, A, D, G, open strings. I'm assuming you know some of the notes there. If you don't, take some time and learn what notes are where on the bass. Basically, people ask me what kind of scales I do, and I do one scale basically, which is a major scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And it sounds like, which sounds way oversimplified, and you probably think I'm lying to you, but in actual fact, most everything I do up and down the neck is basically made out of those components. So the good news is it's going to make it really simple for you to pull apart any lick you hear or any music you hear and figure out what it is and be able to play it. And that is once your ears are developed to that level, it's a great, great thing to have, because it just speeds up your time in the recording studio, learning new songs. It gives you the ability to jam with other musicians because you can hear what they're doing. Very important to learn this. Just basically a major scale. So now, just to get into a little bit on what's going on with my left hand, some people are worried that the neck may be too big or too wide and that they need to do a stretch like this in order to be accepted as a bass player. You'll never, almost never, ever have to stretch huge stretches or bridge across many strings at the same time. So don't worry how big or small the neck is. I prefer a larger neck only because it has more wood on it, get more sustain out of the bass, and it's just a more stable big chunk of mass to hold these strings where they should be when they're making the sound they're supposed to. So some basic left hand techniques I use are 3 positions, and they are those 3 positions, those 3 moves are what all those major scales are made out of. Actually, I'm going to do it in the key of G. It's a little easier for me to run up and down on the fretboard this way. So basically, the 3 positions are a half step and a whole step, which would be, there's a half step, 1 fret is a half step, 2 frets is a whole step. There's a half step and a whole step. The next position I do is a whole step and a half step. The same thing, only spun around. And the next position I know of the 3 is 2 whole steps. Now you may want to use this finger in the middle or this finger. Now if this is too much of a stretch for you, it's because we're down here at this part of the neck. And you may never ever have to make that kind of a stretch ever. And there's all kinds of ways to play without stretching. You can go without even if you're playing with your thumb. So don't worry about these long stretches, and that if you can't do them, you're disqualified. You're not at all. The reason why I said is a lot of people are worried, well, I can't stretch to 15 frets, so what will I ever do? You know, don't worry about it at all. It's just basically, I'm explaining these patterns here, because that's the same pattern here as it is here, or as it is here. So if your hand is very small, you can do the pattern somewhere. Or you can do one note and move up and do the others. There's many ways to skin a cat if your hands don't seem to fit. So here's an example of those 3 patterns. There's 2 of them: a half step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step, whole step, half step. So what that is, it's basically a G major scale. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, and G. The note of G. But what I do, just to be better familiar with the neck, is I will do more notes than are contained in the scale. There's basically 8 notes in the scale. I'll add it so that I do 3 notes per string in that scale. So follow me on this. G major scale is, don't worry so much about your right hand if you can pluck it with 1 finger, with 2, with a pick, or just finger it with your left hand. Let's just do 1 at a time for now. We'll hook them up together later. Basically, now another note in the G major scale is this one on the octave below it. So I'm going to put that in there too. I'm also going to go to the next string. So in G major, all the notes of a G major scale that exist on the bass in this position, what I mean by that is my hand right here, that's all of them. So if you're going to play in the key of G major, all those notes are legal. actually threw an extra one in. That's legal too. So those are two of the patterns. Half step, whole step, again, again, again. Now when I move to the next position, you see how two whole steps, half step, whole step, half step, whole step. The next position would be whole step and half step, same pattern. There's only three of them. Now here's the pattern that has two whole steps. The next one. Three notes per string, G major scale. There's only three patterns. Now, we'll illustrate this for you more as time goes on, but that's basically, if you just played those notes and you were in the key of G major, they would all be legal from this part of the neck all the way up to there. Actually, all the way up to there if you wanted to extend it. So you here. Basically, it's all that pattern repeated and moving up and down the neck. So this has to do with the modes, which I don't really know about. But if you want to find out about what the modes are, there's probably a book on it somewhere. But I don't know what the modes are, and I just played them. Modes are, forgive me if I get this wrong, a way to play a scale in different positions. And different positions mean different things. But basically, all you need to know how to do is to move up and down the neck in the right key. And that's basically it in G major. That's all the notes of a G major. Now, to get into a little bit of the mechanics of my left hand, basically, it has a lot to do with where your arm is located. If I bring my arm, you see how my fingers don't spread apart, but if I pull my elbow in this way a little bit, the hand changes on there, and suddenly I can stretch out to more. So what you might want to do if you want to get a little bit of an extension on the amount of notes you can play on one string with one hand, try pulling your elbow in a little bit like that. Again, we get back to how important it is the bass that feels on your body, just sitting there in your lap. If it feels comfortable for me, I can pull my elbow in here. And if I need to make a stretch, which is maybe 1 or 2 times per career that you need to actually do that, I can do it because it's comfortable. So then, therefore, you see why I was harping on the position of the bass on your body and how important that is. Now, to elaborate a little bit more on those patterns that I'm doing with my left hand, just so you can understand that a little bit better. Each set of notes in that position is a mode. I'm not sure what the name of the mode is, but here's G major. There's the 2 root notes. So if I grab this note G here, I know I've got. Now, when I move up, what I'm doing basically is taking the G major scale in a different position. Now that's the next pattern. So the first pattern, as you saw, was half step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step, whole step, half step. It's a tongue twister. And then here we've got the 2 whole steps. And the next one. One thing I want to stop you there and point out, there's your root note, G. And you notice how this. So because these are all patterns, I memorize the way the pattern looks on the fretboard. So no matter where I am moving around, I'll know that if I've got a G note here, and it's in G major, that I can play. Still B and G. So in other words, all these patterns give you an idea of all the different notes you can play in any position on the bass neck. So here's that again, where I left off. Then the next position up. Next position. Next. See, here's that same pattern again that I had down there, and there's the G. So you see. Here's the next one. And of course the last one is the same as it down at the octave. Now that continues on up the neck. And 2. All the way up to the top note, top to bottom. That's the G major scale all over the neck. So if the song you're playing is in G major, all those notes are fit in the song. Of course, there's some musical, sometimes you might have to take a stretch musically or artistically to make them fit, but nevertheless, in theory, they all can fit in. So if you practice those patterns and articulating them with your left hand and plucking them with your right hand up and down the neck, your familiarity with all the notes that are in that scale would be very good, and where they are in the neck, your familiarity with that would be very good. Now, to change keys on a fretted instrument is very easy. You just basically move up 1 fret or 2 frets, and all the patterns are still the same. They're only in a different spot. Whereas on keyboards, it's always different. So I show you those patterns in the key of G, but they're in every key, and they fit every key, and the same patterns apply to every key. So once you learn the basics of those patterns with your left hand, you basically know a lot about a major scale, and you'll find it very helpful and useful in playing a song, which is the reason why we're doing this in the first place. Okay, here's a little bit more about those patterns to explain a little bit more what I was talking about. When you see that half step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step, whole step, half step again. Now the next position, so I start on that note. The next position would start here. We're going to go 2 whole steps, 2 whole steps, half step, whole step, half step, whole step. So now that pattern changes and modifies as it goes up the neck, but it stays basically those 3 patterns are half step, half step, and 2 whole steps. Their relationship to each other doesn't change. It just moves up and down the neck. And the book that comes along with this video will point out how to go across the whole neck like that, and how to understand what that has to do with music and what that has to do with scales and how it applies to you. Now I show you some patterns with the half step, whole step, etc., etc. You can rewind and look at those again if you want. But here's some exercises that are going to help your hands execute to be able to play all those things. Basically, you see, anytime you see your fingers doing anything, you can break that move down to component parts. So if I'm going, let's break that down to component parts. Basically, I'm playing. So what we have there is we have this move here, which is not easy to do. We have that move there, this move here. Those are all contained in what I just played. So break it down and just exercise just those moves across the neck. Like for example, now that's starting with the index finger. Let's start with the middle finger. 2 fingers, or with a 2 fret spacing. Backwards. These 2 fingers. Backwards. This here, which is a tough one. Backwards would be. When I say backwards, I mean I start on 1 finger once. I start there. Next string, I start with that finger again. Next again. Next again. To reverse it, I start here. Next one. So now use your imagination. Every combination you can possibly do in time, preferably with a metronome or a drum machine or in some way, and do every combination of notes possible across the strings, backwards, inside out, upside down, in every way you can conceive of creatively, and you'll find that your hands become very smooth and very strong and capable of executing anything you might want to execute or perform. So you can get your mind off your hand and not worry about scales and not worry about technique and worry about the song and music and perform and create your art. Music has 2 elements, time and melody. Here's a little bit about time. Time is very important. That's the thing that locks you together with everyone else in sequence. a bass player's relationship to the drummer is very, very important. It's the most important relationship, I think, between two instruments within a band, because it lays down the rhythm section and the foundation. It's very important. So the basics on understanding time is for you to be able to stay in time and have that time in sync with the other musicians you're playing with. I urge people to get a record, sit down and play with it, and listen to how the bass player and drummer work together. Some basic, simple record, some song you love. Sit down and learn and listen. Listen to these guys and how they're doing it and how they're fitting it together. And most musicians I know can keep time on their own. They can just start, go 1, 2, 3, 4, and they can keep that rhythm without speeding up or slowing down too much. Some can't. Some obviously they get nervous and it's faster and whatever. But your ability to hold that time and keep that time there is vital to your success as a player. So one thing a lot of people overlook is just keeping time themselves while they're playing. So while you're on stage or sitting down, just to keep your foot tapping and keep that time there and keep it solidly there. Even though I'm talking, generally, though if you put it up against a metronome, it might be fast or slow, I keep time. It's always there, it never changes. So if I'm playing in time, foot is still going. So one exercise I'd like for you to do is to be able to start your foot going and play along with it in time. Just maybe hit 1 every 4, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, until you can do more than that. This will align the time that your body's keeping with the time your hands are keeping. And it's good to have one part of your body moving in time, like a foot up and down while you're playing in the band. Most people when they're in a band, they're usually moving to some degree in time with the music. And though it may seem like they're just getting into it and moving along, a very important point of it is they've got their body in a rhythm of motion, and it stays in that rhythm. So they may actually play out of that rhythm, but they always have that as a reference point to get back. Like sometimes I'll keep my foot going and I'll speed up or slow down or make a mistake, but that's always going. So my foot is always moving, so I always know what the actual time and sequence of the song is. So as an exercise, maybe get a metronome, sit down and play with that. Like this little metronome I have right here, my little guy. Basically it's just a little click. It doesn't give you an accent, it doesn't give you 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It just gives you a click. So for playing in time, double it up. Very simple. You may be wanting to fast forward or eject at this point because it may seem too simple, but if you just work on that and pound on that and stick with this for a couple of days. I spent a whole summer one time on tour where I had a lot of free time, and it was me in the hotel room with a metronome doing exactly that all day long, and it was great for my playing. So once you graduate from the metronome, get your foot going and just count it as 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 4 repeating. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And play along with it. Play the single notes, upbeats, downbeats are when it hits, upbeats are when it reaches the top of the air before it goes back down again. It's good practice to go between upbeat and downbeat. Down, 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 up, 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 up. And that's one note per number that you're counting, 1, 2, 3, 4. Try. A million different combinations you can do with just your foot keeping 4/4 time on the floor. The point is, make sure that your body is moving, your foot is going, you're hanging on to that time, you're not letting it go, you're not speeding up or slowing down, and you have the independence to let your foot do that and then play along with it and work with it. Get in, out, upbeats, downbeats, 3s, 4s, all the combinations you can think of. And once you have a great lock with time like that, you and the drummer are going to lock together, and it's going to be a wonderful thing. Now Now, as far as your timing goes and your ability to keep time, one very important point that I learned very early on was my relationship, the notes I played, to the drummer's bass drum. So as you watch a drummer play his pattern, and you listen to it on a record, listen to it every time the bass drum hits. And that's basically, this isn't true in all cases, but it's a good starting point. That's basically where you hit a note. So if the drummer's playing, the bass drum would be, and that would be the snare drum, that hard thing. So you basically, if you play a note every time the bass drum plays a note, and you're locked in with it, you almost can never go wrong. So one of the final points I'll make about time is when you're playing in context, in a song, in a band, which is what this is all should be leading towards, always remember that when that bass drum is hitting a hit, you should be hitting a note with it. And it's just a very important point. It's a very basic fundamental. And once that's solidly in, you'll see the relationship of the bass to the drums to the whole band. It'll make complete sense to you. So just basically, when the bass drum's going doo 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 with the bass drum and the snare drum, you know, hit hit snare, hit hit snare, you're hitting along with that bass drum. And that's basically your entrance point into a song and into ensemble playing with the drummer, drums, and band. So remember that point. That's one that helped me out a lot when I began. Since we're talking about basic bass, the fundamental beginnings, I want to give you something here that's a real fundamental and a real basic part and component of so many songs and so much music. It'll help you to get up and running and get in a band and start playing some music you love, which is the whole purpose of this whole endeavor in the first place. And it is simply root fifth octave. Root note, fifth above it, and the octave above that. You see from the, I believe it's Strauss's, I'm not sure who the composer was. Anyway, the Thus Spoke Zarathustra. That was the beginning four notes of, from the 2001 A Space Odyssey movie from many, many years ago. Anyway, those three notes have been used in a zillion things and a zillion tunes. Octaves. So it's a very common thing. So here's, let's just take the key of G and do root fifth octave just in time. So we're... See how my finger lays across there? So I don't have to keep moving my fingers around every time I play a note. I can just kind of lay my hand on there. And, you know, so I clench my hand for the note and just kind of loosen it up, which deadens the strings, and push it down for the next note, which is the next one here. I'm not even really moving finger to finger, but I'm just going. See how my hand closes down to hit the note, and it opens up in between the notes, so there's no noise in between the notes. A couple patterns for you. Now the key of G, 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 and the fifth. Root, fifth, octave. Very little movement on my hand. Keep in time, keep your internal clock going there so you got a good idea what your time is, and just basically root fifth octave. It's such an important bass part that is used in so many millions of songs. It would be a long list to list all the songs that was a basic bass component of. But it's something you can learn really easy right now and apply to many, many songs or whatever music you care to. In G major, that's the basic chord for G major. Don't worry about that now. I'm just trying to show you what the key of G major sounds like. Root fifth octave. Fits in G major. In G minor, it fits in many different variations of the key of G. It's your root note. If you're in the key of A, your root note would be A, E, octave A. Now, at different speeds and different tempos and different rhythms, you start to recognize different songs. I don't want to play too much of the original song, as we know there's people have rights. It's all root fifth octave with some plucking and some time to it. Knowing that as a basic bass player will help you to be able to go and get with a drummer, guitar player, or whoever else and start and get in a band and start to play some music, which is, as I said earlier, is the whole point of our day here today. So now you've seen some basics on your right hand, your left hand. Let's try to, I'm just going to make up a couple of licks, a couple of bass lines, and try to employ some of the techniques I showed you, so you can get an idea of their use in context in what might sound somewhat like music. Anyway, just a simple like that's kind of, it's a little bit of a complex bass line, but let's take it apart and see what we're doing. See, now I'm doing a couple of things there. Let me explain it a little bit. So I'm basically open string. See how those three fingers fit together there? Remember the exercise where we were doing all those things in one position? That's where this will help. You're basically, we go to the, remember the exercise where we went, and then all those exercises are contained in here at some point or some variation thereof. See now when I hit that note there? Remember how I had all four fingers in one position cover four notes on a string? That's just the same thing, only on the next string. So basically we're still within some of the exercises I showed you already. So if your fingers were well exercised, that wouldn't be difficult to hit. So therefore you realize why now you got to rewind and do that exercise a couple times. But again, here's just this lick. I just made it up off the top of my head. Now here I slide my whole hand down, down. So see how my whole hand moves? And the next note is the beginning note again, open string. Always remember when you're playing a lick, there's another note coming after the one you're playing, so be prepared for it. So at the end of this lick, I got to go back to the open E string again to start it over again, because it keeps repeating. Here it comes. And again. Gives me time because it's an open string. I don't have to have any fingers on the neck. So you can speed it up and measure. Let me see if I can do it fast. So you can do it at any speed you want, but take it nice and slow. Just get an idea of watching your hand move and all the things you got to do to get to the next note that's in the lick. So in the book you'll see what the notes are, so take it super slow. That's the first part. That's all you need to know. Then here I'm doing something that I want to explain. Being this is a basic bass video, we want to make sure and explain every little thing so we don't go by anything and leave you hanging. I'm taking from one note to the next with one finger. So I'm actually barring, B-A-R-R-E, bar, across two strings with one finger. Now you can begin to make a whole bunch of exercises for that. we play 2 strings with 1 finger across. See, so you're barring your fingers across. So it's actually a whole other technique that I didn't fit in there earlier. But now you can see, as you come up with things, how to incorporate them. Bar. Start again. And the time of it, 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, take it in metronome maybe way slow. Now you notice it's a lot of notes, but I don't have to do any huge stretch to get to them. It's all within one position, a couple little changes. So you'll have the opportunity, this being on DVD, to slow it down and see it in a little slower context and take it slow until you can really get all the notes, all the nuances, and eventually you get to a point, playing-wise, where a lick like that, you can add your own little, a lot of variations on it, move things around, accent things in different ways, slide, vibrato, all those little things. But first, before you get there, get the basics of it in time, note for note, piece by piece, component by component part, and it'll be yours. Okay, here's a basic simple lick, bass line. It may seem ridiculously simple, but bear with me here and just stick with it, stick with the metronome and watch what I'm doing and put together the component parts of what we've talked about already. In this one, I'm going to use my handy little metronome, basically at, I don't know how many beats per minute, but it's kind of a slow, right around there. There's our speed. And the lick is going to sound like this, basically. 4. So now, that's a basic lick. Basically, you're hitting a G. That's it. Now, I'll put my hand like this, all in one spot, so I don't have to keep moving around like that. So basically, I'm going to go this finger, and this finger here. 4. I'm going to use this finger on 2 different things, sorry. See how I'm waiting for that click? Staying in time, so important. As simple as this lick seems, playing it in time, in a studio, with the producer there and everybody over your shoulders, it's challenging to do something like this in time and do it consistently. So it's a good thing to practice, even if you're not exactly a beginner. 4. See that little space in there? I move my head a little bit with this, just to kind of make sure my body's moving in time with the metronome, and I'm keeping time. It just gets the whole body kind of a pulse of time in sync with the metronome. So now I'm going to add a little bit to it. Here's part B to this lick. What we're going to do, there's a fly in here, so pay no attention to that. What we're going to do is just speed up the plucking a little bit so it sounds a little bit smooth and it sounds a little bit more up. So let's say for the verse, you'd be playing. And like the end of the verse or chorus would come in with those same notes, then we'll double it up on the plucking finger. Here we go. There's no spaces now. Speeding up. So you get more exciting parts, you tend to want to speed up. That's why you got to work with the metronome and stick in there. So basically, here we go. We're plucking a little bit more, same lick. 4. Back 2. See how my hand is locked in one position. I'm not really moving around a lot. I'm moving like that, basically. All my left hand is doing is going from here to there to here, without moving on the neck. So I don't have to worry about flying around or stretches or anything like that. Basically, sometimes you keep time with your hand. Sometimes you can't. But that's very simple, very basic lick. But if you're beginning bass, just to be able to play that in time with a drummer in the context of a song, that's a great spot to be at. Because basically what you're doing is you're playing the notes you need to do, playing it in time, and executing it in a way that it fits in with the rest of the band. And that's what it's all about. Here's another very simple lick, which is up higher on the neck. Get used to playing in different spots on the neck. It's very important for you to know that there's more than just down here, and certainly more than just up here. Try to bridge the two and play some licks in different spots. Pretty simple lick. Basically, we're in G. I'm going to turn the metronome on here. Let's see if we can do this in time. If I can. 1, 2, 3, 4. Couple things going on there I want to show you. First of all, I'm not moving much of my hand except when I'm doing this. Everything stays pretty much the same. I'm moving it from these two frets here to those. So here's what I'm doing. I'm going. So I move the whole thing down there because I'm going to have to do that move there. I'm doing this. Back up. See how the whole hand moves. So basically, that's an important thing to learn in a lick. Instead of trying to do things with, I could all do it in one position, all stretched out. But why put yourself to all that pain and anguish when you can just do it the easy way? Because your hands are really strong when they're together like this, and you're playing. So here we go. We're going to do it in time a little bit, and I'm going to add a little thing in there, and then I'll show you what I'm doing. Basically, here we go. Hand is locked together like that. It's not moving around. The most I'm moving is this. There's no fancy finger movement at all. Just basically I'm doing this with my hands. So I'm going. In time. So again, here's basically what I'm doing. A little trick, a little bit of flavor that I'm adding in it. So I'm going. It's really quick. Instead of hitting right on the note, I'm going. Oh, there's a million little things you can add to the lines and licks you play to give them their own character and their own flavor and their own feel. And that's one of them. A little, I don't even know what you call it. A little bit of a passing note or something. But my hands basically aren't moving out of this position, and they're not doing anything more than going up and down. So it goes down. This finger goes down on the note, up, down to the next one, slides, up, down. Very simple, but a lot of basics are involved in that. There's plucking going on down here. Dun, 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 dun. It's on the G string. It's got to move to the D. So there's a lot of component parts in that for an absolute beginner may seem a little bit confusing. So go back, review what you need to do, but make sure and be able to play on one string, then the next, then the next. Be able to lift your hand up and down. Remember the exercises I show you? Down here. There they are in action. And at the end of the lick, there's a little rest to give you time to get back up to forgot. I'm making these up as I go along, so forgive me if I forget them as I go along. Very simple, but keep it in time. Keep your metronome on, and there's a lick for you. So all these basic techniques I'm showing you fit with any style, no matter what your type of music you're into, whether it's country, hard rock, heavy metal, even electronic, techno, things like that. Bass fits in all those, and there is bass in all of them. Some of it's electronic, some of them 6-string, some of it's whatever, but all these techniques fit in all those things. So if you're playing country and western, that all your plucking techniques fit exactly as they would in any other type, or just plain rock, or some heavy metal thing where you're pedaling fast. It's a good idea to listen to the style of music that you love and listen to what the bass player is doing in it and see how he's treating all these basic things. He's plucking with his right hand somehow, or slapping, and fingering with his left hand somehow. And it does fit in. So I really have to recommend for you to listen to the music you love and listen for the bass part. It's a very elemental and fundamental part to be able to hear the bass in the song when you listen to it. I remember the first time when I was a kid and heard the first couple of rock tunes that I was into, and somebody pointed out to me, yeah, hear that right there? Yeah, that's the bass. And I go, wow, cool. I never knew that before. A lot of people don't. So listen to what the bass player is doing in the type of music you love. In country, it's basically you're holding the root note, C, maybe a fifth. Move around easily, but you're a fundamental part of what's lying underneath all the guitars and vocals, which is in country music. In heavy metal, you're playing much closer with the drummer, and if it's a double bass drum, you got to play a lot of. I'm doing a lot of fast notes here with my right hand. Maybe a pick would be better for you if you can't quite do it like that yet, but you get the idea that all these fundamental basics fit with every style of music there is. So it's best to really learn these basics, how to pluck, with what fingers, which you're best at, which you feel most comfortable, all your left hand techniques, all the things you'll see in the book about what notes to play, and find out how it applies to you and the music you love. Since the bass you're playing is electric, you're probably going to be plugging it into an amp, so I thought I'd go over some basics about just amps and amp settings. Not too elaborate, but just some basics that you need to know to get up and running, which is, of course, our main point here. Basically, I'm using just a little practice amp here today, just to illustrate notes and illustrate what I'm doing. It's not very elaborate, but it's all you really need to hear the notes you're playing and know if what you're doing is correct or not. All amps have some tone controls on them. And you've got a bass, and I get a lot of emails and questions about how do I set my amp, or what settings do you use, or questions along those lines. I'll just give you an overview of what the amp should sound like or could sound like, and how you might use these different things. As you see, mostly there are many other different kinds of controls and all kinds of things that it'll add, but the basics are volume and tone. In this one, basic volume, of course. In tone, we have treble, middle, and bass. That's high tones, mid tones, and low tones. So basically I have the bass just plugged in. I have the treble turned all the way up, the mid and bass all the way down, just to show what the treble control is going to do. With the treble control, you're going to get all the noise, the scrape of the strings, all the click, all those little noises. But you don't get much low end or much power behind it. You get articulation. You can hear all these notes go by, but you can't really feel them. So let's pull the treble down. And here's the mid-range. It's kind of a happy medium, that's why they must call it middle. You can hear the note, but you can't really tell, you can't really get a really solid, deep, low-end foundation like you hear when a car goes by and they've got a subwoofer on their stereo and you have this giant low-end thing going on. You get a nice cutting tone that might cut through the guitar player and drummer, but it doesn't really link up with things. Then I'll turn that down and just turn the bass up. And basically get... But now we have the other end of the spectrum. Now that we have super deep, nice, low... nice, beautiful, deep low end filling out and rounding out the sound of the band. A lot of times if you play any fast amount of notes, you can really tell it just kind of goes by as a muffle. So depending on your taste and what you want to do as a player and how you feel you should play, you balance these three things. Basically, your treble will be the noise, the sound, the click, the rhythmic qualities of your strings. The mid-range is going to be the body of the note, and the low end is going to be the big, solid, room-shaking sound that all us bass players love to do. So if you start, what they call is flat, which means right in the middle for all controls, you've got a little bit of all of them. That's a great place to start at. Start there. Fool around with that. See, do you want more? Want more low end? You can do that. You want a little bit more articulated? Turn the treble up a little bit more. So basically, you know. Now, this also has a little style button here, or switch, which does probably a whole bunch of different things. I'll ignore it for now, only because basically we're just concentrating on basic tone. And every amp, this is an Ampeg amp, but Trace Elliott or Hughes Kettner or Fender amps or you name it, there's Marshalls. Basically, treble, middle, bass, so I'll stick with those. Every amp also has some other extra little controls that it does, little nuances. Try a lot of them out and see what you like. But the basic amp here, treble, middle, bass, you want to basically set it flat. I'd like a little more mid-range on that. For me as a player, I generally go for, I'll set the bass flat, I'll pump up the mid-range a little bit, and I'll pull the treble down. So it'll give me a pretty even bass tone, a nice grind in the middle, and I'll hear a little bit of the click. Take that back, I'd add a little bit more treble to that. But I usually do a little hump in the mid-range. That happens to be my personal preference and my style. Some guys do the opposite. They pull all the mid-range out and turn the treble and bass all the way up. So you get a real bright high end, real deep low end, and nothing in the middle. If it was a graphic equalizer, we call it the smiley curve because it goes like that. And it depends on what you prefer, what the music you're playing calls for, what you feel best playing through, what makes it sound like it should to your ears. There's no right way, there's no wrong way. There's a couple variations on some ways it can be. So you make your choices, experiment around with it, and see what you come up with. Okay, so now that you have a bass and you're using it, there's going to come a point where you need to change a string. Now, I may seem very, very basic. You may think you already know how to do that, but I just see a lot of strings put on incorrectly. And I'll show you the way I do it very quickly so you can play in tune, change a string properly, and your bass will be the proper tool it's supposed to be. This is my Yamaha Attitude bass. I'm going to change an E string on it. I use a Rotosound strings. I've used it for many, many years. My own set here, the BS66 set. So I'm going to change the E string, pop it out of the case, and first get rid of the old one. Basically. Some people say you should take off all the strings and do them all at once. Some people say you should do them one at a time. I really don't know. So I get rid of the old string, grab this new one here. One thing I always do is throw the envelope in every dressing I'm in. So if you find one of those on the floor, you know I was there. Anyway, so you get the string out, you got to string it through. There's a couple different ways to do this now. I just want to quickly refer to another type of headstock, which is on a different bass of mine, which is the 4-4. You see the way they wind, so they come up, down on this side. If they wound the other way, they'd come down on this side. So you want to come down on this side, so that it's the least amount of angle to the nut there. So that's how that works. Actually, I've seen many times people string basses backwards, where it's strung from this side over to here. You don't want to do that. So here we go. We'll take the bass string. I usually give it a little kink like that so I can get it through the little hole there easily. Whip it through. And then it's too long. So if I started winding it now, it would wind around so much it would be too much on there, the big ball of wound string. So what I do, you can either cut it, or what I do is I usually bend it right there as such. In this particular tuning peg, I can jam that down into a little hole there. And I'll start the first wrap by hand. Go around once. And here we're holding the string. Now I hold it pull tension on it. So I'm holding it so it never loosens up. Because once it's loose at the beginning, and you tighten the rest around it, it's always going to have that loose part. So as you go on and tune, eventually time after time, you're going to be it's going to keep going out of tune. So I keep it under pressure, and then I start to wind it. Making sure that I'm not wrapped around a knob or anything like that when I wind it, because that'll put a kink in the string and ruin it and make you have to start all over again and buy another set. So I wind it. When I wind it, I make sure that each subsequent wind goes underneath and pushes it down closer to the wood. The reason for that is that way I'll get a good angle at the nut. If it's not very much of an angle, it can buzz. So if you have a really sharp angle, it won't buzz as much, or will buzz less, or not at all. Wind it up really good, really fast here. I should have brought my string winder, would have sped this right along. But anyway, you get the idea. And once we get it up to speed there, I keep it pressure on all the time. Make sure it's in the little notch there. Holding the pressure on, pushing it down towards the wood. Coming up to speed here now. And once it gets too tight for my fingers to get under, I pop them out from under. And then I take the bass. Now it's in tune. There's the string on and in tune. But as soon as I pull it a little bit, it's completely out of tune. So here's what you do when you put a new string on. So what I do is I pull really hard to tighten it up on that post. Now it's way flat. Now it's in tune again. If I pull it again, a little bit, it's going to go a few more times before it's completely on there, until I can't pull it flat anymore. Also try pulling it from this side a little bit in case it got loose in there a little bit. There. Now it stays in tune. Now when you're on stage playing really hard, pounding away, the bass is going to stay in tune. That's a very important thing. So it may seem like a simple basic thing on changing a string, but these little things that I've learned over changing thousands of strings for many decades, keeping it close to the wood, keep that angle as acute, would that be? As tight as you can, making sure there's nothing loose down here, and as you tune it up, pull it back up to pitch, tune it, pull it, tune it until you can't pull it flat anymore. Therefore, when you go out on stage and you get all enthused and excited and do some big bend, you'll still be in tune. That's how you change a string. Now again, something very simple that a lot of people overlook is just how to get and keep your bass in tune. Basically, you want to get a decent tuner. Tuning to records or CDs is unreliable sometimes because the guys who played on them may have been out of tune in the first place. So basically in my rack when I play live and at home, I have a little digital tuner. This is a Korg here. It's plugged into the bass. When I hit a G note, the G lights up and it tells me it's a little bit sharp, so I can basically get it right in the middle there and you're in tune. Same with the D, a little sharp again, the A, right in, pretty close. Now, tuning sometimes is more of an art than a science. You'll notice as a bass, if I turn it this way, the G will go flat. If I play that G note and turn it this way, the G will go sharp. It did just like I said it. Because the weight of the neck pulls it a little sharp or a little bit flat. Depending on the bass, some do it more than others. Mine does it a lot because I use a lot of bending, and it's a pretty flexible neck. So make sure that when you're tuning it, you're in the position that you're going to be playing it. So make sure that it's flat this way and not leaning forward or back, or may become incorrectly tuned sharp or flat in that respect. And then as you get it in tune according to the tuner, you may want to check it with your ears. Just make sure the harmonic here is that note there, and it's a little bit off. But sometimes bass to bass, you'll find that maybe a little bit out of tune on the open strings, but when you play it on the closed strings, it's in tune. So it's a funny thing. That's why I say it's more of an art than a science. And each instrument has its own little nuances of what's right and what's wrong and how it works. Some basses are in tune perfectly up and down the neck exactly all the time. Some basses are a little bit funny in some areas or other. It's just kind of the nature of the beast, and you put on a new set of strings and it changes. pretty much in tune. That's pretty good. So get up by. It's still pretty good. You get a little bit of wavering. That means it's out a little bit. It's just the nature of the beat. Sometimes it's not going to be exactly in tune all the time. So basically, get yourself a decent tuner. Tune. This is the harmonic way. A harmonic, I kind of passed over that quickly. You just touch the string lightly and pluck it. There's a harmonic there. They're all over the string from the whole length is harmonic almost at every point. So when you're tuning, you just basically. Sometimes you may want to drop your E just a tiny bit flat, because when you hit it, you may hit it hard and pull it, and it may pull itself sharp. So work with the instrument. That's why I said earlier on, it's very important to stick with the same instrument for a while, because you'll learn its little nuances of how it tunes. Sometimes the harmonic tuning doesn't work on some basses as well as it does on others. So those are some of the things you might want to watch out for. But if you get yourself a good tuner, even if you're fretting a note up on the neck, there's the G. It's a little flat up there. Oh, there it is. It's pretty close. You'll see it drift in and out as a string. The power of the string, the energy, when you first hit it, it goes up and then drops down. Sometimes it can make it go sharp and flat in that respect too. As long as you're pretty close, it's only rock and roll anyway, so as long as you're pretty close, you'll be in there. But seriously, keep a tuner. If you can, a lot of amps have a tuner output, so you run a chord from that into your tuner. So while you're playing, if you're in the middle of a song, you're wondering, am I in tune or not? My G's a little flat, so I can do a quick. Get it back up to speed there. So some of these notes up top on this bass, you see, you get a little wavering. What I mean by that is, like if you hear this is a little bit out of tune. You hear it go, that wavering. And when it stops, you're in tune. Here we go. That's what gives a 12-string guitar its sound. The strings are never exactly in tune, so when you play two of them together, they waver, and it gives a little chorusing effect. So sometimes there's a little bit out of tune somewhere, you'll hear a little wavering. There's barely any in there at all. You can counteract it by vibrato if you have to. But anyway, that's what I'm doing when I'm tuning by harmonic. It's flat. Bring it up. That'll make it in tune across the neck. And just as another note, if you'd like to play along with this video, here's what I'm tuned to. Here's a G string. Rewind it again if you didn't get it. D string. A. And an E. So line your bass up with those frequencies there, and we can work together. Well, the reason why we made a video for absolute beginners is because I think a lot of times when people are beginning bass, there's a lot of very important parts that are left out. And a lot of instructional videos and magazines and information that's available today, which there's a lot of, is mostly geared towards people who can already play, already have a bass and have held it, maybe played in a band, and maybe to improve their playing. But if you're just beginning, some of the things I showed you here today are very, very important for you to understand right from the get-go, and will really help you later on down the line as you progress and take this adventure known as bass playing in the field of music. I've been very lucky to have a great career as a bass player and musician. I'm very, very thankful to most of you for allowing me to do that. So I can wish you at least that or better for a conclusion to your adventure as a bass player. So remember that this is a video, and you can stop it, slow it down, rewind it. So if you have trouble with a certain spot, don't get frustrated, slow down. It took me many, many years to get up to the point of being able to play even remotely fluidly, so don't let it frustrate you. It may take some months before you're even able to get around on the bass. That's okay. It takes a long time, but that's all right. Stick with it. It's fun. It's a riot. You'll enjoy it. Remember the basic fundamentals I taught you here today. Listen to music Try to play the music you love. Try to listen to records and learn songs off records. I did that a lot when I was young, and it helped me a lot. Maybe at some point find a great instructor or a good music school to help you expand on your playing. If you prefer, it's not always necessary. But anyway, either way, no matter what road you take, stylistically or otherwise, I just want to wish you the very, very best with your bass playing. It's an amazing adventure. It's very rewarding, and I hope that you can achieve what you're setting out to achieve as a musician. And I wish you the very best of luck, and I hope I see you around.